So the Jamaicans for, or should I just say Jamaicans for Justice, has added its voice to the growing expressions of concern around the controversy or the matter regarding the retirement age of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Joining us this morning to weigh in on this issue, JFJ's Executive Director, born wicked to me, Michael Jackson, is here. Hi, Michael. How are you this morning?
I am well, a little sleepy, but thank you so much for having me.
You try wake up. Happy Emancipation Day. Emancipate yourself from sleep and come and talk to myself and Harris. You have taken a stance on behalf of your organization. You've weighed in on the matter. Tell us a little bit about JFJ's stance on this issue.
All right. There are two things that JFJ is looking at when it comes to the constitutional amendment bill. We're talking about process, and we're talking about the reasoning behind the process. So let me better explain. For those who are not aware, there are three ways in which the Constitution can be amended. By way of a simple majority, so 50+1 of those who are in Parliament. So we have 63 members of Parliament in the lower house. So if 32 of that 63 vote for a particular bill to be amended for the Constitution, then it is so passed and it goes to the upper house. We can also amend the Constitution, some provisions like going to the Caribbean Court of Justice by 2/3 majority. That's roughly about 67%. Or we go to a referendum. So for example, we're talking about getting rid of the monarchy, the king, then that requires a referendum. Now for this particular constitutional amendment to move the age of retirement, technically and theoretically, it's something that JFJ agrees with. You must streamline your age of retirement. We can get that argument. The problem that we have is that notwithstanding that it requires a simple majority vote don't mean that you show up on Parliament on the day of, you table a bill and you ram it through. That's not how process is done. We have 63 members in the House. It requires deliberation. It requires some sort of participation from the members.
Consultation, you're saying?
Yes, you must have some consultation. And that is the challenge that we're having. This is the supreme law of the land, and it requires certain levels of respect from the government, any successive government, I should say. Anyone that is in the House, you must have certain respect for the supreme law where you consult the different members in the House. Now, one then asks the question, why is the government pushing this particular bill through? Let us give a little bit of context now. You have a current office holder in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. That particular office holder would have gotten an extension already to have remained in the office for an additional 3 years, and that 3 years expires in September. So one asks the question, why the rush? Is it that the government is circumventing the constitutional provisions that currently exist that would prevent a second extension by simply changing the Constitution? And that is the controversy of it all. Is the government simply changing the Constitution to get its way? And we cannot have that in a democracy. We're not an autocratic government. We're not a one-party state, and the government must respect the Constitution. And if it is that there's something not to its liking, then the consultation is required. I also want to put a little bit of context for the Jamaican people who are listening this morning. You have a constitutional reform committee that currently exists. This committee was never consulted on this matter. So again, the question is asked, why the rush? Is the government using its simple majority to bulldoze a particular bill through Parliament to circumvent and get its way for a de facto second extension for the current office holder?
To what end? To what end, Michael? To what end? Outside of the extension, what would the end game be for that?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate at all. And that is the problem, Simone. You don't want to speculate as to why the government is pushing this particular issue before the September expiry date. And when you have that kind of question, to what end, then it really casts a particular shadow on the ODPP to say, why is the government pushing this bill? And it questions and it leads to public perception. Is there the possibility that the impartiality and the independence of the office is now compromised? That is the public perception that is going to reasonably exist by those who are looking on. So from our perspective at JFJ, it's unnecessary controversy, and we're really asking two things: that the extension is not permissible for the current office holder. If the government ignores that particular call, which I surmise that they will, because you haven't gotten any clear indication from them that this is not the case, then we're appealing to Ms. Llewellyn that if it is that such extension applies to you, we think it is in the public's interest, and certainly to maintain the integrity of the ODPP, that the office holder does not accept such extension, because too much unnecessary controversy is surrounding an office that is constitutionally entrenched.
Yeah.
That has certain powers and authority that you don't want it to be embroiled in this sort of controversy at all.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing two things from you, Mikael. I'm hearing just the ways in which this applies to this particular moment, but also that there is precedent that may be set in the way we move forward in adjusting constitutional matters. And speaking of precedent, you raised the Muirhead Committee of 2002, where there was some conflict with the then DPP Ken Pantry and his team, which included Paula Llewellyn as a senior prosecutor at that time.
Yes.
There is some kind of controversy at the moment happening. Should that Muirhead Committee approach also as a precedent come to bear on this moment, that there are issues that need to be resolved?
Absolutely. And just to quickly put things in context, why we say that this matter is untidy and leading to unnecessary controversy. The letter that came from Cathy and Pike that painted a particular picture of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is anchored in the messy and the untidy manner within which the government moved towards amending this bill. Now, one can raise a reasonable question. Is Ms. Pike raising questions that is made up? Nevertheless, we have to give civil servants the benefit of the doubt. And that is why we're calling for an independent committee, similar to what happened in 2002, to be established by the Public Services Commission. I want to also put in context quickly that JFJ, we have gotten several complaints from civil servants. I won't call some of the institutions because I don't want to put people in a precarious positions, but several complaints from law enforcement officers, from doctors across the island, and from other civil servants to say, I feel muzzled. I feel as if I can't speak on matters of public interest. I am witnessing abuse and lack of leadership and so on in my particular area of work, but I can't speak. I have gotten a memo to say, if I speak, this is the end result that may very well happen. So we have to treat Ms. Pike's complaint and letter with a level of seriousness that requires that independent oversight. But I go a step further. When I read the letter, the response from the Director of Public Prosecution, it raised some concerns to me, because any reasonable person would feel as if they would want to defend themselves. That's understandable. But in defending yourself, and you use words such as eccentric, in Jamaicans, people mind you calling this person mad. So we asked the question, was that an appropriate response from the DPP? And had the DPP had these concerns, then it also raised the questions about the leadership of the DPP. And in that regard, we're saying that the situation is far too untenable. And we think, again, in the public interest, that when September comes, it's best that the DPP does not seek an extension.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question, Mikael. And I also want to be careful that we don't put words in people's mouths. We have to be very careful.
Absolutely.
What was written was what was written. I guess interpretation is a different thing, but I just want to make that clear, right? For those who say that this extension is merely an extension of somebody who holds public office who is doing a good job, for those who say she has served well, and maybe the way this is being done is a little untidy, but she has been serving well and so she ought to stay. For those who do not think this questions the independence and partiality of the office of the DPP or the DPP herself, and that there is no compromise of her work, of her ethics, of her, because many people respect her and think she really does an amazing job.
Absolutely.
For those who are saying yes, it's messy, but she'll work. She's working. And so why not grant this extension? Maybe the way in which it's done is not the best, and we ought to really talk about that. And as Harry said, precedent moving forward. But this could be, something that's being done because she's effective. How do you respond to that?
Let me start by saying and make it absolutely clear for those who are listening on. We're casting no aspersion whatsoever on the office holder. The DPP is someone who I personally admire. She's our first female office holder. I personally admire her for that particular feat that she would have overcome and that she would have met. And I think we have to give that to the office holder. But the issue here is also beyond the office holder, but how the controversy may put a particular cloud over the office itself. Any particular position for the highest ranks of those who are in government and who hold certain position within the state, we must ensure that how we treat it and the process by which we go about making changes, putting in systems in place is one that can stand up to certain levels of scrutiny and that one that ought not to be embedded in unnecessary controversy. So I want those who are listening on to be very clear. JFJ is saying nothing negative about the office holder, Madam DPP. What we're talking about is process and whether or not, quite frankly, some of the words that were used in that letter by the DPP, however, perhaps would have placed her in a position where your own words may disqualify you from leadership in the office. That's the point that JFJ is making. So I want to be very clear.
All right,
and similarly to Ms. Pike, we're not saying that we agree or disagree with the contents of any of the letters that were put forward, but both letters would have raised some reasonable questions in people's mind, and therefore it requires certain levels of scrutiny and independent oversight in bringing the matter to a close going forward.
All right, Mikhail, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us. For my part, I long for a day when the public discourse about civil servants is handled in a manner that's a little bit more thoughtful of the office holders and the office itself, because I've seen some really great public servants just go through too much and decide that.
And if I may, Dela Simone, quickly, I think every single Jamaican must join in condemning the distasteful comments made by Mr. Buchanan. Absolutely. And I think those that were made by Dr. Dayton Campbell on a public platform regarding the DPP must also be condemned. We must treat matters of this nature with sensitivity without putting people's reputation at risk. We must have cerebral approach. These are bright people, so-called bright people, and we have to rise up and level up and ensure that when we're speaking, we speak in a manner. We don't have to speak and jump up and down for people to get likes and so on. We have to speak in a matter that is deserving of the positions that we hold. So JFJ condemns Dr. Dayton's commentary and absolutely condemns that of Mr. Buchanan. And we hope that well-thinking Jamaicans who are listening on also condemn any future politicking on this particular issue. Let us level up our thought and ensure that when we're speaking on these matters, we speak from a place of constructive dialogue. That is my end.
Okay, we have to go. So Jamaicans for Justice, we'll come give back me and Simone our work. Thank you so much. JFJ, it's always great talking to you. Executive Director Mikhail Jackson. Coming up next, it's Girl Talk.